Hello everyone and welcome. So it's no secret that I'm a massive fan of the Vampire Chronicles and everything it brings to the table. I love so many of the characters, but when it comes to my all-time favourite, well, for me, that's got to be Lestat de Leoncourt, whose fame began with the Anne Rice classic Interview with the Vampire. This book really spearheaded vampires back onto the scene, and to be honest, the genre hasn't looked back since. Lestat is by far an incredibly written character, from his difficult beginnings with an abusive father to his ups and downs throughout his life as a vampire, how he embraces vampiric nature, and how he is a fantastic example of what happens when a vampire has had enough and says, screw the rules. In today's video, I'm going to cover the entire life of Lestat with reference to his autobiography, The Vampire Lestat, and Interview with the Vampire. I'll cover his tales and experiences in The Queen of the Damned and The Body Thief in a second separate video. So today is just going to focus on The Vampire Lestat and Interview with the Vampire. Welcome back everyone and thank you for the support. Lestat is one of the most recognizable vampire characters in movie, screen and literature history. Although he's had more appearances on paper than the big screen, I think it's safe to say it would be very hard to forget the vampire's magnificent portrayal by Tom Cruise in the movie adaptation of Interview with the Vampire. Even Anne Rice herself, who was strongly against Cruise playing the part, was won over by his representation of the character, and if I'm honest, I seen the movie before I ever read the book. Despite there being several excellent vampire book series, I personally would place the Vampire Chronicles at number 1, as it was basically a template for so many characters' relationships for future sagas and series. I'd put the Vampire Diaries as number 2 by the way, but that is something we'll talk about in another video. Today is all about the most eccentric, flamboyant, vicious, evil vampire to exist, Lestat de Leoncourt. The vampire who was never given a choice, something I'll get to a little later on, in case you've ever wondered why Tom Cruise kept saying that in the movie. Lestat's first appearance comes in Interview with the Vampire, but that is certainly not where his life begins. Like all vampires, he once had a mortal life, but it was definitely not an easy one. He was born on November 7th, 1760 in Auvergne, France. Being the youngest of his brothers meant he had very little prospects, as only his eldest brother would inherit their father's land. He was a very quiet child but did not want to languish with no prospects. Lestat was then sent to a monastery to be properly educated. He liked it so much that he decided he wanted to join the order as a brother. His father and his older brother would not accept the boy making such a pledge and physically dragged Lestat from the monastery, ending his education permanently and before he could properly learn to read and write. This devastated Lestat as he was left illiterate, meaning his prospects lowered even further, and it did not appear like he was going to make much of his life. When a band of travelling Italian actors came to his village to put on a show, Lestat completely fell in love with acting and everything it represented. He was determined to become an actor and left with them the next morning. This was extremely short-lived however, as his father and brother followed him to the next town. He awoke alone, only to find them there waiting to take him home. Once again, Lestat's father interfered with something his son wanted to pursue, and the boy only grew more resentment towards him. By the age of 21, Lestat could only write his name and some prayers he'd learned from the monastery, but he could not put sentences together. He was then asked by his local villagers to slay the wolves that kept coming into the area, and with the help of his mastiff, impressively, Lestat slay all 8 wolves. This led to an encounter with a man named Nicolas de l'Enfant, who happened to be in the area when Lestat had killed the wolves. Lestat's mother Gabrielle encouraged their friendship and, knowing how controlling her husband had been over her son's life, also pushed him to leave with Nicolas when they had the chance to do so. When the opportunity did come up to leave, Lestat went to Paris with Nicolas and gets a job as a backstage assistant in a theatre. He's so well liked and appreciated that he eventually works his way into the show as an actor and is hailed for his performances in the 3rd and 4th acts. That was all he ever wanted. what he had dreamed of. Lestat was happy. His life could not be more perfect. That was until he began noticing a mysterious white face in the audience that is continually watching him show after show. He's kidnapped by this mysterious face, who then turns out to be a vampire named Magnus and is held prisoner until Magnus concludes that Lestat is the one he will make into a vampire as his one and only fledgling. It appears evident that Magnus had been contemplating creating a successor for some time, judging by the amount of decomposing, blonde-haired, blue-eyed men in his cellar, Lestat being the one to finally make the grade. Magnus had grown tired of life as a vampire. He had lived for over 300 years and did not wish to continue being immortal. He refused to make any more of his kind as he believed it was a curse, and when the time was right, he would create one and only one fledgling. Lestat had no say in the matter. He was chosen and the dark gift was forced upon him. This is where I believe the "choice I never had" line comes from. Lestat wasn't given the choice to die, something he offered to Louis.
If I leave you here, you die. Or you can be young always, my friend.
Magnus informs Lestat that he will commit suicide and leaves him with some basic self-preservation rules. He does not tell Lestat about vampire history, where they come from, how they came to be, how to use his gifts, nothing.
I learned absolutely nothing. I wasn't given a choice, remember?
The young vampire was left to fend for himself. One of the dark gifts bestowed upon Lestat after his transformation is the power to read minds.
Read your thoughts.
Something he rather enjoys. He also has the power to entrance his victims, forcing a calmness upon them. In addition to that, Lestat is incredibly strong, powerful, and extremely agile. He also inherits Magnus's riches, which gives him a decent level of comfort. Being Magnus's only fledgling in 300 years, Lestat gained his power due to his creative strength not being diluted but passed on to him. With the money he had inherited from Magnus, Lestat purchased his beloved theatre he had performed in and began to distance himself from his mother and Nicholas due to them both being mortal. Lestat tried to resume his old life, acting in the theatre, putting shows on, and for a short period of time, things seemed to be okay. That was until he genuinely frightened the audience with his supernatural abilities during one of the shows. Fearing a backlash, he shut the theatre down. Realizing he can't return to a normal life, Lestat feels the urge to embrace life as a vampire instead, hunting the streets of Paris and learning everything he possibly could since he was taught so little. Sometime after establishing himself as a vampire, Lestat's mother Gabrielle arrives in Paris looking for him and informs him she is dying of consumption. Knowing his mother will surely die without his help, Lestat reveals his vampiric ways and transforms his mother into an immortal, saving her. He teaches his mother what little he knows, and the two hunt successfully for the next 6 months, but Lestat can't help but feel an overwhelming presence surrounding his every step, as if he's being watched, which makes him very uneasy. This presence reveals itself as a coven of Satan-worshipping vampires. They pursue Lestat and Gabrielle for reasons unknown to the two vampires. Things come to a standstill when the coven chase and surround them outside the church of Notre Dame. They won't enter, but a young-faced vampire appears and actually does follow them in. This is the vampire Armand, leader of the coven. Armand tries to convince Lestat and Gabrielle to leave the church willingly and come outside to talk. When they refuse, he then threatens Nicholas's life unless they do so. This angers Lestat, but he and his mother comply. The two are taken to the coven's lair in an old cemetery. While there, they are scolded and labelled as traitors to the vampire race for not living by the strict code that every other member of the coven adheres to. However, Lestat does not lie down when it comes to such derogatory treatment. He argues back, stating that living in a dark cemetery hidden away is no way for a vampire to live. Lestat states it's pathetic and worshipping the devil for nothing in return is completely pointless. Why should vampires live in the shadows when they are the ones with the power? The Coven's vampires begin to resonate with Lestat's reasoning, which infuriates Armand. The escalating conversation results in the two engaging in battle, and Armand is completely shocked at how strong and powerful his opponent truly is. Lestat defeats Armand without exhausting effort and literally destroys every belief Armand had established amongst the Coven, harming his authority over them also. The next night, after they leave Paris, Nicholas pleads with Lestat to turn him into a vampire. Despite Lestat protesting against it, there is no way of knowing how the dark gift will affect each individual, but Lestat eventually relents and transforms his friend. He described turning Nikki as one of the worst moments of his life, as he could feel all of his friends' inner darkness. As he feared, being a vampire did not sit well with Nicholas. He became unstable and inconsiderate of others. His emotions and inner torment were clearly evident, as he didn't even care about concealing his existence as a vampire. With his concerns growing, and Nicholas now refusing to even speak, Lestat goes back to the old flat they lived in and retrieves his Stradivarius violin, thinking it would cheer Nicholas up. Before he arrives at the flat, however, the vampires of the Satanic Coven find Lestat and plead for his help. They explain to him that Armand has been burning vampires alive and needs to be stopped. Lestat agrees, but first says he wants to retrieve the violin. He finds Armand in the flat, attempting to gather as much information as he can on Nicholas. Lestat is disgusted at him and leaves, with no intention to ever cross paths with Armand again. Lestat then takes Nikki and his mother to see his solicitor so he can get all of their affairs in order. Nicholas, without warning, fled from them both and disappeared into the night. It was becoming evident that his mental state was now deteriorating. Lestat and his mother track him to the theatre he once owned. There, he finds Nikki playing his violin aggressively and rather unpleasant, but the vampires in the theatre begin to dance. Nick scolds Lestat and tells him how much he hates him and demands that Lestat give him ownership of the theatre for ruining his life, to which Lestat reluctantly agrees. Nicholas names the building the Theatre of Vampires. For those of you who never read the book, The Vampire Lestat, and only seen the interview movie, then you'll recognise that this is the theatre where Armand and the others perform a vampiric act on the innocent girl who pleads for her life, but pretends as if it's a show. Louis sums it up quite well in the movie when he says, "Vampires pretending to be humans, pretending to be vampires." Nicholas would be warmly welcomed by the vampires of the theatre, but would quickly become even more erratic with his behaviour. Like Lestat's creator Magnus, he would demand to have his own funeral pyre created, and afterwards plunge himself into the flames, committing suicide. Lestat's wish of never crossing Armand's path again doesn't last very long when the two meet while out at night. Armand appears friendly to him, creating a false sense of friendship. This was only to get close enough to Lestat to drink his blood in order to gain more power. It's important to understand that Armand is still in the body of a 17-year-old boy, so he's not 100% developed into an adult and never will be. Lestat resists and overpowers Armand, beating him endlessly until he takes a moment to look at how desperate and alone that the boy is. He takes Armand back to the tower and listens to the story of his creation. This begins Lestat's fascination with Marius, a 2,000-year-old extremely powerful vampire who could have all the answers Lestat had been searching for. He writes a message in stone, more like a calling to Marius, asking him to find him. He goes without answer from Marius for the next 10 years as he travels with his mother. They part ways for good when Gabrielle withholds a letter from him that contains information of their family member's demise, all except his father, that is. Lestat had become disillusioned with life as a vampire. Unwilling to withstand the current climate, he buries himself underground and slumbers with the hope that one day Marius will answer his call to ancient blood to strengthen those who must be kept. Onkill and Akasha, the first ever vampires. I'll be making a video on them in the near future, but to give you a rough idea, Onkill and Akasha lost their bloodlust and became living, marble-like statues, cared for by Marius for over 2,000 years. Their vampire powers and mannerisms were actually from a demon that lived within them. Only by creating more vampires could they spread the demon out amongst these, warns Lestat not to enter the chamber. Lestat at first listens to Marius, but he can't ignore the overwhelming call to visit those who must be kept. He enters the chamber and wakes Akasha and Onkill. He drinks from Akasha and she drinks from him. However, Onkill attacks Lestat in a jealous rage and is about to crush his skull, until Marius returns at the last moment to save him, threatening to take Akasha away if he kills Lestat. Onkill is extremely powerful, and his rage is still evident. Marius instructs Lestat to leave the island as his life is still at risk. Lestat reluctantly agrees and travels back to New Orleans, where he comes across an individual by the name of Louis de Pontulac. Lestat falls in love with Louis and turns him into a vampire. Louis allows Lestat to move into his plantation home along with Lestat's dying father. As they settle, Lestat still refuses to talk to his father due to the years of abuse he endured. As his father's condition worsens, he tells Louis to end his life, which Louis reluctantly does. Lestat struggles to convince Louis to embrace his vampiric nature, but eventually realizes that the beauty of Louis is the fact that he retains a large part of his humanity. After some time, the vampires begin to arouse suspicion, only appearing at night, no sign of them during the day. The slaves begin to rise up and eventually drive Louis and Lestat away from their home. They travel to the Frontier plantation outside the city, a place of which Lestat is familiar with as he killed the owner, but it was a short stay as they could not settle comfortably. They soon head back to central New Orleans, where Lestat resumed his merciless killing spree, which forced more resentment towards him from Louis' standpoint. Lestat comes to the realization that Louis may very well leave him. He despises Lestat for making him what he is, a soulless killer. Lestat genuinely loves having Louis as a companion and doesn't want to lose him at any cost. One night, he comes across Louis feeding on a 5-year-old girl, Claudia, who had been residing in a plague-ridden derelict home. He mocks Louis for his hypocrisy, but in a desperate attempt to get Louis to remain by his side, Lestat turns the dying little girl into an immortal child. The guilt of almost killing Claudia, followed by Lestat saving her life, causes Louis to remain by his side. The three become a family and care for Claudia as she begins her life as a vampire. However, as Claudia's mind and intellect grow, her body does not. Trapped in the body of a 5-year-old, she develops a deep resentment towards Lestat and eventually comes to hate him for making her what she is, just as Louis does. For 65 years, she lived as a vampire in a child's body, and things finally come to a head between her and Lestat. She tricks Lestat into drinking dead blood and then kills him, or so she believed. She and Louis take Lestat's body to the swamp and dump it there, unaware that Lestat was still alive. He manages to survive the swamp, feeding on cold-blooded animals for the minimal energy it gave him to pull himself out. He also credits Akasha's blood playing a major part in his survival. Although he was still alive, the attempt on his life weakened him severely. He no longer had the power he once had, and had it been any other vampire, they would not have survived. When attempting to gain revenge on Claudia and Louis, he was set alight and horrifically burned, fire being extremely deadly to vampires. Once again, this should have killed Lestat. We've already seen 2 examples in this video alone of vampires committing suicide by fire, so it really does highlight just how beneficial it was for Lestat to not only have Akasha's blood, but also Marius's blood. Louis and Claudia flee to Paris, believing him to once again be dead, but could not be certain. Little did they know that Lestat had ideas of his own. He visits the theatre he once owned and asks Armand for help. In exchange for his help, Lestat has to openly admit that the person who attempted to take his life was Claudia, as the vampires wanted her dead anyway for being far too young. Armand then lures Lestat to the top of the theatre's tower under false pretenses. He tells him both Louis and Claudia are now dead before dropping the facade, accusing Lestat of ruining his life when he made all of the beliefs Armand had established seem obsolete, in addition to defeating him in front of his coven. He easily overpowers Lestat due to the latter's weakened state and throws him off the tower, leaving him severely injured. With it being so difficult to hunt without being discovered, it took Lestat 2 full years to gain the strength to be able to recover to the point where he could travel back to America. When he does, he spends the rest of the 19th century alone in isolation, feeding on rats, with no will to want to do anything but merely exist. Armand visits several times, but Lestat just ignores him, although he could always hear him when he arrived. Lestat continued his isolation until he feels rejuvenated by the sound of a rock band. He vows to become the vampire he once was. We're going to continue Lestat's story after the events of Interview with the Vampire. Now, as I said, I'll be referencing the final 5 chapters of the novel The Vampire Lestat as it leads into The Queen of the Damned. Now, Lestat says he doesn't even remember the emergence of the 20th century, only that it was ugly, and he misses the days of the 18th century where everything was better. He lived in run-down, abandoned mansions over the years, and he speaks about their huge, giant pillars still strong enough to hold everything together. Lestat submerged himself in every book he could get his hands on, and he stops feeding on humans completely, opting instead for long, grey, disgusting rats. He compares the black and grey moving pictures of the new cinematic age to be a perfect reflection of these colourless times. He lost interest in reading and falls deeper into a somewhat depressive state. He recalls how unfazed he was at Armand's visit, how he still lay there on the floor, despite Armand making conversation, despite Lestat not seeing Armand in so long. But he did feel some happiness after discovering that Louis was indeed alive. Lestat says, "I think I laughed a little. It really was wonderful that Louis still lived. My beautiful Louis surviving, instead of dead and gone, with Claudia and Nikki." Lestat also recalls Armand's frustration and his current state in comparison to what he once was. "You've gone mad, you. The one who knew everything. The one who scoffed at us. You're mad, and you feed on the rats." By the year 1929, Lestat could no longer bear the current climate, and he decided to dig a hole deeper than he's ever dug before, and he buried himself in the soil, vowing that should he ever see the night sky again, he would do no harm to the innocent ever again. "I will be the continual awareness for no purpose at all." After almost 60 years in an isolated slumber, Lestat finds himself with the somewhat undeniable desire to become the vampire he once was. He wants to be the old Lestat, and this is down to the sounds of modern technology rejuvenating him to rejoin a society that had bored him for so long. Radios, television sets, and sluggish voices upon which hearing projected images into his mind like any mortal would. However, the decisive figure in the vampire's revival was the sound of a band who played in a home not far from where Lestat was resting, just a block away in fact. The band were called Satan's Night Out. Their music spoke to Lestat. It was beautifully melodic. He says, "There was something vampiric about rock music. It must have sounded supernatural even to those who don't believe in the supernatural." He finds the band and tells them exactly who he is, and he also recalls how not once in 200 years has he ever revealed his true existence to anyone who wasn't marked to become a vampire, not even to the victims he was about to drink from. Nobody until now. He is taken back to find that they've already heard of him through a novel called Interview with the Vampire, and believe that he was just pretending to be the vampire Lestat from the book. Lestat reads the novel, and upon discovering Louis' take on their time together, doesn't actually return to the band for a week while trying to piece together the shocking information he just received. He comes to a decision and is now more determined than ever to carry on with this plan, not just for global musical domination, but to leave behind a legacy of his own. He takes charge of the band and renames it to the Vampire Lestat, which will also be the name of the autobiography he has decided to write. The songs of the band will be a reflection of his life from the book. He's more surprised how quickly the band take to him being an actual, real vampire. Live show is scheduled to take place in San Francisco, which will be the first live show that the band has ever played, and Lestat is well aware of what to expect, as he knows he has angered a lot of vampires by revealing their secrets.
Come out, wherever you are.
Just before the day of the concert, Lestat is reunited with Louis, who pleads with him not to go ahead as planned, even though many people still believed it was all part of the act. Nothing is going to happen. You'll see, Lestat tells Louis. I have a battalion of mortals guarding us. Don't go on stage tomorrow night, Louis said. The films and the book, do what you want, but protect yourself. Let us come together, let us talk together. Let us have each other in this century the way we never did in the past. Despite Louis' pleas, despite hearing his beloved Louis speak words that he longs to hear for so many years, Lestat decides to go ahead as planned. He decides to be the Vampire Lestat for all to see, and takes Louis to San Francisco with him upon the latter's request. The concert goes down incredibly well, even with the prospect of the vampires who vow to cause a problem. Lestat screams, I am the Vampire Lestat! To a rapturous applause as the band played for 3 hours without any interruption. However, the time came when the threats finally became a reality. Lestat and Louis run away from the stage in order to escape harm and make their way to Lestat's Porsche. The car was surrounded by 3 vampires who sought to make him pay. Suddenly, the opposing vampires began combusting into flames without any real explanation, one after another, to Louis and Lestat's total astonishment. Gabrielle, Lestat's mother with whom he had long lost contact, arrives on the scene and drives him away, adding to Lestat's already confused state. As they make their escape, Lestat is angry as he assumes that the unseen force causing the vampire's death by fire is indeed Marius. Lestat has never known anyone but Marius to be in possession of the fire gift. The car is followed relentlessly by vampires in what appears to be an armoured van. The vehicle rams the Porsche, causing Gabrielle to lose control and crash. No one is hurt, but before Lestat could challenge the vampires who are chasing them, they also combust into flames by the same unseen force. Surely it was Marius. It had to be, Lestat thought. However, after they properly discussed it, both Gabrielle and Louis agreed that the force they felt seemed wild and uncivilized, which does not match the description of Marius, but the question still remained. Who could it be? Lestat reaches out to Marius through his mind in order to find out why Marius didn't reveal himself at the concert, only to be left shocked at the latter's reply. Ice. Buried in ice. She has... Lestat, help me. All of us. Danger. She has... Suddenly the connection breaks and Lestat correctly questions if the person Marius had been talking about was actually Akasha, if she had indeed finally risen after millennia. For so long Marius had tried different methods and hoped that the technology of the time would wake the Great Mother, only to be met with disappointment. He had finally seen success when playing Lestat's music videos on a television that he brought into the sanctum where she and Enkil resided. She awoke, travelled to San Francisco, watched Lestat's concert and had slain all of Lestat's enemies who wished to destroy him, which in turn caused Lestat to now disagree with Marius that Akasha brought danger with her. The Great Mother had finally visited Lestat moments before he was going to rest. Lestat describes it as follows. Then I felt a hand suddenly close on mine. Cold as marble it was and just about that strong. My eyes snapped open in the darkness. The hand tightened its grip, a great mask of silken hair brushed my face. Despite Lestat wanting to embrace the Queen of the Damned, he found himself losing consciousness as the sun began to rise. So guys, that's it from the novel The Vampire Lestat, as we now move to the chapter entitled Lestat from the Queen of the Damned novel in order to continue Lestat's story. Lestat awakens to find himself in the castle where he was born, although he has no recollection of how he actually got there, just that he feels as if he has been with Akasha for a very long time. He knew immediately that Enkill was destroyed and that Akasha alone held the prime evil power, Lestat's description of the sacred core. He also recalls the difference between drinking from Akasha when she was in a statue-like state in comparison to her actually being fully active. Lestat can hardly control the surge of euphoric energy travelling all over his body from the Queen's blood within him. Akasha tells Lestat that many vampires all over the world have been destroyed, but the people that he cares for have been spared. She says, "Look into my eyes now, and listen only to what I say. I have spared many more than I required, and this I did for you as well as for myself. I chose the ones you love, the ones you would see again. I could not take that comfort from you, but now you are with me and you must see and know what is being revealed to you." She then shows Lestat the visions of her slaughtering hundreds upon thousands of vampires in order to make room for the remaining angels. The children of darkness are now gone according to the Queen. Akasha then teaches him how to use his greater vampiric powers that he now has after drinking from her once again, like how he could reach the top of the abandoned tower that no longer had stairs with as little as a jump, no need for flight at all. Akasha takes Lestat to the temple that was created by another vampire named Azim to be worshipped by the humans that live there. "You dare come into my temple?" Azim shouts. "You will die now," Akasha replies. "You who have misled these hopeless innocents, you who have fed upon their lives and their blood, you shall die as a lesson to your people." Akasha kills Azim by incinerating him, but even though he burned, he still tried to attack Akasha before his head finally caved in, emitting flames. Akasha then proceeds to start killing all the men in the temple. She asks for Lestat's help in this task, and although Lestat is very reluctant to do so, he eventually joins in with the massacre and finds that he actually enjoys it. Akasha takes Lestat to other cities and repeats the killings, but Lestat doesn't join in this time. Lestat tries to reason with Akasha and persuade her against killing almost the entire male population, but she argues her point that humans are a truly awful race, a race who have slaughtered each other for centuries, a race who valued greed over all. If Lestat should be upset about any human deaths, it should be over those who died from disease, famine, and who were innocent casualties of the many, many wars. Her only reason to spare anyone, humans and vampires, would be to worship her and Lestat as gods. She warns Lestat if he will not obey her command, she will dispose of him like the others, but makes it clear that it is not her wish to ever do so. Lestat brings light to her with his mere presence. Lestat also questions Enkill's death and why it was necessary. Akasha responds and tells him that she didn't really kill Enkill, more like released him from his empty-minded state. He no longer dreamt, no longer seen visions, could not return to his flesh-like state to actually live again. He was gone, and Akasha absorbed his power into herself. "Now you shall be a god with me," she tells him as she gives herself the title of the Queen of Heaven. Akasha then goes with Lestat to see the remaining vampires who have gathered together following Akasha's awakening. Among them is one of the red-haired twins, Maharet, of whom he has dreamt about. Lestat warmly embraces Gabrielle as the other vampires enter the room. He also notices how angry Marius is towards both Lestat and Akasha, and concludes that nothing could disguise that anger. He reflects upon his relationship with the collection of vampires in the room and concludes with Daniel, the young boy who sat in a room with Louis recording his story on his little tape recorder, a story that started all of this. Lestat knew that there would be a fatal conclusion, that he was certain of. He immediately notices Maharet's violet eyes and how her dead vampire body tries to force blood flow into her human eyes. Akasha lightly attempts to convince all the vampires to join her and embrace her vision, to help her make the world a better place, to end the cycle of human violence. Akasha, don't continue this bloodbath. Don't lie to human beings or befuddle them anymore. Lestat immediately feels the embrace of death across his body after speaking those words, but still, he and Marius ask Akasha to refrain from her plan and see the world that she has been hidden from for so long. Akasha then declares him and everyone else her enemy. It genuinely bothers Lestat to choose a separate path from Akasha. He can't deny the attachment he feels to her. Suddenly, the presence of an unknown individual was then made known. It was Mikare, the other red-haired twin, Maharet's sister. Lestat notices Akasha's confidence is diminishing after Mikare's arrival. She lunges at Akasha and quickly beheads her. Lestat describes witnessing Akasha's death as follows. I heard her scream. Then I saw her profile as her head struck the western window and shattered it. Akasha's headless body was sliding down the fractured glass wall. Blood streamed down the broken glass behind her. The woman held Akasha's severed head by the hair. Mikare then consumes the heart and brain, becoming the new Queen of the Damned. She is left mindless to some state and has no thought, although that's for another story. Lestat then travels with the rest of the vampires to an island owned by Armand called the Night Island, near Miami. Lestat stays in his room for a month, writing the story of the Queen of the Damned. He eventually leaves the island to find Louis, who has returned to New Orleans.
I am not what men say I am. I am not an angel. I am not a devil. I am not God. I am Memnoch, and I have come for you. And you will hear my tale.
Hello everyone, and welcome to The Life of Lestat de Liancourt, Part 3, where I cover Lestat's involvement in the 5th installment of Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles book series, Memnoch the Devil. Now, I've already covered books 1 to 4, which is split into 2 videos, Part 1 and Part 2. You can check those out first if you've not seen them before coming back to this video. Now, I'll link the 2 videos down below. When I complete Lestat's entire life, I'll compile it into one big super YouTube movie for you all to watch, but obviously that is some time away. Anyway, we're going to talk about Memnoch the Devil. Now, this book really takes us in a different direction, and I have to admit that it's one of my least favourite books from the Vampire Chronicles, as it's quite heavily religious based in relation to the heavy vampire based stuff from Anne's previous books. But in saying that, by the end of the Tale of the Body Thief, it's kinda like, well, where does Anne go from here? What's next? Anyway, let's get into the story. So, Lestat is currently experiencing an existential crisis and is feeling exactly how he did before he buried himself the last time round, just before the events of the Vampire Lestat. It's pretty clear that for all his charisma, personality and overall power, he's struggling with the will to continue living in the current world climate. He grapples with a sense of emptiness and a longing for purpose. He contemplates the monotony of his existence, wrestling with questions about the meaning of life. He feels as if he's seen everything that human life has to offer and that vampire life has to offer also. He wants more, but he doesn't know what that more is and how to get it. I was so sick of life and my own existence that I couldn't stand to see another nightfall. He recounts the beginning of his existence to entice the reader to continue to invest in what he has to say, but due to his overwhelming longing for a purpose, it inadvertently opens an invitation to something a lot bigger, almost like his desperation to find more makes him stand out to the individual he's about to meet. Lestat can feel a presence looming over him, but he doesn't know what. He's never felt anything like it. He keeps seeing a dark figure and he summons David Talbot to him in order to air his concerns. After reminiscing briefly, Lestat explains that he has summoned David because he thinks he's being stalked by the devil and he is afraid. Lestat tells David that he has been hunting a drug dealer and an art smuggler who he refers to as the victim. The victim is currently having dinner with his daughter Dora, who is a religious figure on television. While conversing with David, Lestat also eavesdrops on the victim's conversation with his daughter, during which the victim attempts to present Dora with a gift that she refuses to accept. David suggests that the stalker's appearance may be related to Lestat's current victim, especially as Dora is a religious figure, but Lestat maintains that the two events are separated since the presence first appeared before he began his hunt. In order to comfort his friend, David promises to stay in New York and procure suitable accommodations. David worries when Lestat requests that the accommodations contain a view of St. Patrick's Cathedral. Lestat pursues the victim to his secret house filled with his stolen treasures, and in reading the man's mind, Lestat finds that the man laments Dora's refusal of his gift, a sacred religious artifact, as are most of the victim's relics. Lestat arrives at the house before the victim and is startled by a huge black granite statue which resembles Lestat's image of his stalker. He avoids the statue when the victim arrives. The victim seems aware that someone has been in his home as he passes the rooms Lestat had not entered and lingers in the ones that Lestat thoroughly inspected. After drinking from the victim, Lestat empties the victim's pockets, cuts off his head and hands and places the pieces in 3 separate bags as he saw the victim do to Dora's mother when reading his mind. Lestat disposes of the body by burying it in separate places around New York City amongst rubbish. He finds the act deplorable but appropriate since he was the man's killer. Happening across a small church, Lestat notices the absence of the stalker's presence. He is now sure that the stalker is not related to the victim, at least not as a protector, but he knows that the stalker will return, which he sees as another reason to avoid Dora, as he can't help but link the two together. After entering a bar and washing his hands, Lestat notices a man sitting at the end of the bar laughing at him. When the man addresses him, Lestat recognizes the victim, Roger. Lestat is initially terrified at what he's just seen, but it doesn't take the turn that many of us would probably expect. After confirming that Lestat has no intentions of killing Dora, Roger asks his killer to watch over her and her treasures because he worries what will happen when people realize that the religious leader is the daughter of a smuggler and killer. Talking of Roger's life and who he was before Lestat killed him, Roger asks Lestat to also help Dora, since it's not fair for her to have had him for a father, and Lestat agrees to help her. Roger tells Lestat about his life, how he became the smuggler and killer he was. He highlights the events that led him down the path he walked, and Lestat begins to resonate with him and feeling sorry for the circumstances that affected Roger's life. He wishes he gave him the opportunity to talk to him, but was set on killing him as he already labelled him an evildoer. Roger, however, has accepted his fate. Lestat laments that it is too late to make Roger a vampire and wonders if Roger can stay with him as a ghost, but Roger says they are coming for him, followed by Lestat hearing the footsteps of the stalker. Hearing roaring voices and seeing the face of the statue, Lestat begs them to leave Roger alone as he wonders if the stalker has been pursuing him because of Roger alone, wanting Lestat to end the man's life. Lestat actually grieves when he loses Roger and drifts into a mortal sleep to escape the pain of losing someone he attached to so quickly. This could be considered one of Lestat's biggest weaknesses. He attaches to people too quick. He wanted Louis before he even knew him. He fixates himself on having a companion to give him purpose, and it's quite alarming how quickly he went from loathing Roger when killing him to actually grieving him when he departed as a ghost. When he wakes, he wants to find Dora and tell her what he has done, but it is nearly sunrise and he must now take his immortal sleep. Just as he is about to rest, an ordinary man in the corner of the room appears and tells him it's not so simple. Lestat jumps up, flips the bed, and is burned by the sunlight before fading into sleep. As Lestat and David discuss the events of the previous evening, Lestat paces the floor of the Olympic Tower, stopping occasionally to peer at St. Patrick's Cathedral. He is eager to help Dora secure her fortune and convinces David to go to the treasure house with him because he is terrified of facing the statue, though he is eager to complete his task. Fear overwhelms Lestat as he enters Roger's flat, and he is convinced that he is going to hell when David tells him there is no black granite statue. He acknowledges to himself that the statue must have been the devil. Admiring David, Lestat believes that it is due to the amount of blood he gave him rather than its strength. David invites Lestat to watch him hunt for the first time, and after drinking from a crazed drug addict, David feels that he will not survive. But Lestat assures him that it is just a residual feeling from the young man. When Lestat notes David's despair, the two vampires focus their attention on Dora and what they should tell her as they travel to New Orleans. David believes that Lestat is imagining the stalker because punishing himself is the only way he knows to have fun. When they arrive at the townhouse Lestat once shared with Louis and Claudia, he is relieved that Louis is not there. He visits Dora with the intent only to watch her, but he enters her convent and ascends the stairs to the chapel. As Lestat admires the cross, the ordinary man enters with a proposition which he is unsure whether he should make before or after Lestat gets mixed up with Dora. Lestat has an epiphany that the stalker, the ordinary man and the statue are all the same person. The ordinary man states that he will allow Lestat to finish his business with Dora, but soon they will discuss Lestat's soul. He advises Lestat that Dora will be a distraction that he should just simply leave alone. When the ordinary man leaves, Dora enters and heads towards her room, but then she stops and enters the chapel. Lestat and Dora look at each other for a moment, but he disappears, bolting for the attic. Dora follows and finds him. She knows that her father is dead, but asks Lestat why he has come to tell her. She acknowledges that Lestat is not human, though she is unsure whether he is good or evil. Lestat explains that he has come to watch over Dora, and when she compares him to a frightened elf, he says that the circumstances frighten him, not her. When she asks why, Lestat tells Dora that he is a vampire. Dora cries for her father, though she claims that she knew she would never see him again. Lestat carries her to her room and watches as she cries. He is distracted by the smell of her blood, but Dora is unafraid of Lestat. Marveling at her lack of panic, Lestat reminds himself that he cannot fall in love with her. When Dora begins to pray, Lestat prays with her. He tells her how he became a vampire and that he thought that being a vampire made him evil, but she claims he must have a place in the scheme of things. When Lestat hears the stalker's approach, he leaves Dora, telling her to call upon him if she ever needs him. He flees for the townhouse where he finds the ordinary man laughing at his bravado. The ordinary man introduces himself as Memnoch the Devil and states that he has come to make a bargain. Though Memnoch is winning his war with God, he is tired and needs Lestat's help. He wants to tell Lestat the entire story and show him heaven and hell. He is confident that Lestat will be willing to join him when he knows the entire story. Memnoch grants Lestat 2 uninterrupted days to consider the proposition. He says,
I am not what men say I am. I am not an angel. I am not a devil. I am not God. I am Memnoch, and I have come for you, and you will hear my tale.
Lestat sends out a call for David and finds him with Armand, and Lestat tells the others everything, opening his mind to Armand. As they discuss the matter, Lestat reveals that he intends to seek Dora's advice. David becomes very angry over this revelation. Meanwhile, Lestat claims protection for Dora from all vampires. The following night, after Dora finishes her television program, Lestat grabs her in New Orleans and takes her to New York and the Olympic Tower. Once they are inside, Dora is more concerned about how Lestat's shivering than she is about the fact that she has just been flown halfway across the continent. He asks her about her uncle losing an eye, a piece of information that Dora can't comprehend that Lestat is even aware of. That is until he reveals it was the devil who told him. Dora asks for something to eat and drink, and Lestat immediately runs out to see to her request. On his return, he finds it amusing that he is a powerful immortal who has just run an errand at the request of a mortal girl. Dora thinks that the devil could force Lestat at his will at any time to do his bidding, but she doubts he would need to trick him to hell. Also, she tells Lestat she does not believe that God would allow anyone to be tricked into hell. He would have to choose that path himself. Therefore, Lestat should take Memnoch up on his bargain to learn the truth and visit both heaven and hell, since no one said that Lestat had to choose to help Memnoch. Just hear out what he has to say, and then make his own decision. Dora tells Lestat that should he need her, to call her, and she will send up prayers for him. Lestat tells Dora that it is not God that is dead, it is that people hate God. With that, Lestat leaves Dora at the Olympic Tower to spend more time looking over her inheritance, and goes to the steps of St. Patrick's Cathedral and calls the Memnoch, who arrives and begins the journey with Lestat. The journey begins in a whirlwind, which Lestat describes as being though the whirlwind were made of souls that surrounded them. Darkness drains from Memnoch's form, and he becomes light. Finally, he sees a man in front of the balustrade, and even Memnoch bows his head. The man is God. God greets Lestat by saying,
"You would not be my adversary, would you, Lestat?"
Then Memnoch takes Lestat back to Earth. Lestat is heartbroken. He wants to go back to heaven, and he cannot believe God would know his name. Lestat weeps and accuses Memnoch of thinking him a coward. Memnoch explains that he does not find him to be a fool nor a coward, and should Lestat join him by being his lieutenant, he can visit heaven any time he chooses. Memnoch also explains the reason that Lestat feels this way at this very moment is because when he met God, he was God incarnate, and God incarnate is a suffering God. Lestat becomes ashamed of his weeping and tells Memnoch that he has to know the whole story. Memnoch states that this is exactly what he was waiting for, and now they can begin. The two take a walk, and Memnoch remains in the lighter form he had shown when in heaven. Memnoch explains that God commanded he use the dark cloven-hooved persona when he is on earth. God cannot stand to see it in his gates, so there, Memnoch is allowed to walk in his true light form, but he admits he prefers the image of the ordinary man when he is dealing on earth. When Lestat questions him as to why he is being allowed to maintain his true form, Memnoch explains that at this moment they are not in time, so no one around them would be able to see or hear them, and that is why he is able to wear his lightened form. Memnoch explains to Lestat that the argument between God and himself is that God was created of energy, much like his own lighted form. However, once God created matter, time came into existence, and since God was not created of matter, the evolution on matter would not come back to create God. Memnoch tells the tale of how he came to the gates of heaven, and God tells Memnoch to go back to Earth and behold all there is to know about humans, and then to come back once he has learned that they are part of nature. Then and only then would God call convocation. Memnoch knew he was being tested and that he needed to learn all he could about mankind. Memnoch explains that the Watchers, or guardian angels that fell to earth, are there to keep watch over it and know what it is that God wished them to see. He states that with the angels that descended, they went their separate ways and often convened, but he could not yet see as to how they were part of nature. The angels discovered that mankind was believing in God and making sacrifices to him, thinking that he was easy to please or displease. Memnoch continues describing the spiritual organization of things. Lestat is caught up on the tale, but he has one particular point of interest, which is Dora and Roger. For some reason, Lestat is unable to let go of the idea that Memnoch had something to do with Roger and Dora's appearance in his life. Lestat is aware that God died knowing he would return to heaven as such. God asks Lestat to watch his death, and Lestat is afraid. God tells Memnoch to guide Lestat through it. Lestat and Memnoch watch as God carries his cross through the procession. Time stops for a moment and God asks Lestat if he wants the blood that has run from him. Lestat refuses and God asks why his blood would be unworthy. Lestat drinks his blood and time begins again. Veronica then steps before God and wipes his face with her veil. She tells him that for 12 years she bled until she touched the hem of his robe and it was healed. God then took the veil from Veronica and gave it to Lestat. Lestat is transported to the fall of Constantinople and the slaughter that lies there. He is horrified, and Memnoch suggests several other options of brutal destruction of life in the name of God, which originated from the book. Lestat begs Memnoch to tell him of the battle between himself and God. Memnoch seems indifferent to the whole idea and only comments he would not have started this life if the souls could have done it on their own. Memnoch grants Lestat a rest. Memnoch asks Lestat what he thinks hell is. Oddly, Memnoch asks Lestat what it would take for his soul to forgive Magnus for taking him from who he was to the blood-drinking monster that he sees himself to be. Lestat comments that he has forgiven Magnus, but that he would need forgiveness from his victims to know what would have happened had he not interfered as he did, what life he had denied them. They travel together to hell, and there is such wind that they cannot hear, and there are souls in human form fighting, and others heralding others to enter. Lestat describes it as a medieval Chinese castle. Everywhere there are men and women screaming, "I didn't know." Lestat sees Roger with Terry hanging onto him. Some souls are happy to see him and beg him to stay, while others argue among themselves, too taken up with what they are doing to notice him. Lestat panics in all the chaos and savagery. He declines Memnoch's offer and says he cannot stay there. He cannot take it. Memnoch chases him to the doorway to Earth and commands the other souls to give chase as Lestat carries Veronica's veil. Memnoch tries to stop Lestat's escape, calling him a coward, and tears out his left eye trying to stop him. As the other souls cry for Memnoch to squash the eye, Lestat escapes back to Earth. Lestat then finds himself back in New York. He runs through the streets screaming for Dora and finally sees St. Patrick's Cathedral with the Olympic Tower rising behind it. He rushes through the doors and finds Dora, Armand and David there all staring at him. He falls to his knees in front of Dora and takes what blood he can from her that will not cause her wounds. He insists that no one come near him and that he be left to sleep. When Dora asks if she may sleep next to him, he denies her, as he is afraid of what he may do. Meanwhile, Lestat learns that he has been gone from Earth for 3 days, and in that time, Roger's death has been discovered, Dora's television program has been cancelled, and David and Armand have assisted Dora in removing the relics to an orphanage in New Orleans. The next day, Lestat awakens to find fresh clothes laid out for him. He undressed carefully so as to not lose any bit of the travels left on the clothes. After bathing, he forces himself to stare at the ruin of his face with the missing eye. Finally, Lestat joins the others in the living room. Armand asks what happened to his eye, and Lestat tells them that gangsters popped it. It could have been saved. He tells Dora that he has seen her mother and that it will not be long before both parents are in heaven. He tells the others of the entire events as they played out from the beginning up to the point where he burst through the door to the Olympic Tower suite. Armand asks Lestat if he believed that this was the truth. Lestat finds himself irritated that Armand would go back to the argument if vampires serve the devil or God. David knows that Lestat has collected the clothes for scientific proof, if there can be any. Lestat begins ranting as to if he believed any of it or if it was all a trick. Armand's reaction to the veil is overwhelming, as he was one to suggest that the devil was not evil and that he'd take the devil up on his journey. As a result of his actions and guilt, he walks into the sun in the name of God and is destroyed as Lestat hears God's words come back to haunt him. Dora had taken the veil to the cathedral where she had it on display to much attraction. Lestat rages at the crowds that sit outside and sing praises, saying that Christianity is the most bloody of all faiths and that he could not bear witness to that. As she was now the custodian of the veil, she cut all ties to her former life. Dora is calling Lestat the messenger of God that has brought this relic to her. Lestat, on the other hand, is risking too much and is overwrought that he has been the one to breathe new life into the religion that Memnoch hated so much. He fears for what he has done. Lestat is so distraught that he brought back the veil so that David and Dora would believe him, instead causing such madness that people are flocking from all over the world to see it. David is so concerned for Lestat that he has packed all their belongings and asked Lestat to leave with him immediately. Lestat is both torn between whether he was a fool or not, but for whom? Memnoch? God? And in all the chaos, did he anger the other vampires by drawing this attention? David and Lestat leave for New Orleans, and Lestat finds the chapel of the orphanage set up with the relics that Dora had received from her father. He wonders who had done this for him, and Louis steps out into the light. He asks Lestat to come home and be among his own belongings for comfort. Louis feels uncomfortable in the chapel as there are ghosts about, those of children singing. As they begin to leave, Lestat feels an ancient and sees that Maharet has come to see him. He tells her that he will not take an eye, that he will not take a life. As he raves back and forth, Maharet tells him that she is having him chained up for a while until he quiets down. She presents him with a package that was given to her for him. It contains his missing eye and a note from Memnoch thanking him for a job well done. Lestat is enraged and is locked away to keep himself from harm, and he accepts that he has lost Dora forever. David and Louis visit him, and eventually he is released to walk the earth again.